Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm so excited to be chatting with author Marcie Colleen. Welcome, Marcie.
Thank you for having me.
So, to start, obviously, I've discovered you through Storyteller Academy and your wonderful class. So, I'd love to actually hear how you got involved with Storyteller Academy.
Oh, wow. Quite a while back, I was at, I believe, an Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators conference in LA. And through friends, I met Ari Chung, who is the founder of Storyteller Academy. And Ari is one of these people who, when I first met him, he has so much energy and so much vision that you knew that he kept on coming up with all these different companies that he was working on, and you just knew one of them was going to stick, and it was going to be like the thing. And when he finally settled on trying to create Storyteller Academy, he had approached me, I think at like a party at that conference, and asked me if I would be interested in teaching for them. Um, I believe that it was like a couple years that had gone by before I actually started teaching for him. He contacted me. We had a couple of meetings. And at that point, he really wanted me to focus on chapter books, teaching chapter books, because although I started my career as a picture book writer and I had taught how to write picture books. I teach how to write picture books currently for the University of California, San Diego. It There was a real need and desire within the industry, within the community, to learn how to write chapter books. And so there wasn't really a lot out there. And so Ari asked me to come on. And what is so great is because it's a self-guided video class that, I'm out there teaching. I don't know who I'm teaching, whatever, who's paying attention. But every so often, I will get an email from somebody who's like, "I just completed your class. It's wonderful." It starts a great dialogue, like it did with you. And I teach another longer form class. It's a on Zoom personal interface class on chapter book for the Writing Barn. And I get a lot of students who have taken the mini class from Storyteller Academy who then come to study with me for 6 weeks with the Writing Barn. So it's been a great way to really spread the love of serialized fiction for kids.
That's really wonderful. And what would you say? So, since you've written, obviously, of course, as you just said, chapter books and picture books, what would you say would be kind of like a misconception about between the two? Because I know, say, people would think since picture books are shorter, that maybe that's easier to write, but obviously, that's not necessarily the case at all. What would you say with that?
Well, when I first started out, I think I did buy into that fallacy that it was
Mm.
just kind of like I wanted to be a writer and I wanted to write books, but I didn't want to write a lot of words. It was like it was like I knew I didn't have a novel in me, and so it was like, well, I could write picture books, and I loved the form of picture books. The thing that I think is the biggest difference with writing for picture books is you have to learn the art of leaving room for the illustrations. So your language can inspire illustrations, but it very much does not tell the exact same story of what is being told in the illustration. So, when I teach students, that is probably the biggest hill to get over is learning how to leave room for the art in picture books so that, you read a line, but maybe the punchline or maybe the reveal is actually in the artwork, which is difficult because I'm somebody who absolutely loves writing comedy. And so to give the humor and the punchline over to the art can be kind of difficult. With chapter books, there's really no guarantee what kind of illustrations or art you will have. I mean, when I grew up, chapter books like the Ramona Quimby books and Encyclopedia Brown, like those books were really all prose with just maybe a line drawing at the top of each chapter heading or a one-page illustration within the chapter. And so you very much have to rely on your words to tell the story, not relying on, well, this will just be shown in illustration, which was a learning curve for me because when I first started writing my chapter book series, The Super Happy Party Bears, which is published by Macmillan, my editor there had to keep on telling me, can you describe this more? Can you describe this more? And my feeling was like, but isn't it going to be in the artwork? And it's not always in the artwork. So there's definitely a different skill set that goes into both. And then I also write comics now. And so that also is a different skill set. However, I think it all boils down to storytelling. And I just love storytelling. And as long as you can learn the format that you want to tell a story in, and you can learn the pacing with which, do you have a 14-page comic? Do you have, a 130-page chapter book? Do you have a 32-page picture book? As long as you know what the parameters of that format is, it's really fun to play around with storytelling in all different kinds.
Definitely, because like you just said, it goes back to character and story, and like
Hmm.
when you talk about in your class too, like adventure, comedy, mystery, all that fun stuff too.
Yes.
I'd love to hear too, for you growing up, what was like if you had a favorite book, or maybe this is all separate, favorite book or character or TV show that like inspired you and made you want to create?
Mm. Well, I think when it comes down to books that I really loved as a kid, like as a young kid, chapter or at picture book age, I would say it was definitely the Curious George books. I mean, they're old, but they're classics. I have the anthology of all of them now, and I loved the antics. I loved the fun illustrations. I loved that there's this one illustration in Curious George Takes a Job that I always talk about, which is at the end when his story is being projected on the screen in a movie theater. And you can look in the audience and you can see everybody from the story who he met along the way in the seats. And I just love that as a kid, that allowed me to find more of the story within the artwork than just what my mom or whoever was reading it out loud to me. And the same thing with Richard Scarry books. I mean, I just loved being able to pore over the illustrations and find so much more story. It just felt so rich. It felt like a much bigger world. And then when I got older, and I was into chapter book age, it was definitely the Beverly Cleary, Ramona Quimby books. I really loved those. I tore through them. Um, it's funny because I meet a lot of children's authors that seem to have read a lot of the classics and the canon, and they're like, Wind in the Willows and Anne of Green Gables and stuff like that. And I feel like there's a real hole in my childhood because I went from like Ramona Quimby to like binging and not being able to get enough of Sweet Valley High. Sweet Valley High was it for me. I loved those books, and I was constantly going to the bookstore and buying a bunch of them and then starting to read them in the back seat of the car right away. And it wasn't just books that influenced me. I mean, I very much as I draw on for my chapter book class, I very much really was into cartoons when I was a kid. And I think that that has probably influenced some of my writing more than anything else is, all the cartoons that I watched right through high school and even in college. I mean, I'd come home from high school, I'd be exhausted, and I would peace out on the couch to Disney Afternoon and probably fall asleep to the DuckTales theme song, but I was watching it and fell in love with just serialized fiction through cartoons.
Amazing. So, what was your first book that you got published?
The first book that well, it's so funny. There's no linear path at all in this world, right? So the first book that I sold was Penguinaut, which is a picture book published by Scholastic. I sold that book in 2014, and 2 months later sold Love Triangle to HarperCollins, which is also a picture book. That was when I was very much focused on I'm going to be a picture book author. I was like, 500 words, that's comfortable for me. I'm not writing anymore. And I dove into learning all I could about the craft of chapter books. However, during that time, I met Aaron Stein, who was an editor for the imprint called Imprint at Macmillan. And she approached me and she said, we're building an IP in-house for a chapter book series. And I was wondering if you want to be the writer on it. And there were two things that happened in my body at that time. First of all, I rejoiced. I was so excited. And then also like my blood ran cold because I had never written or studied chapter books before. And it was always something that was something I was going to do down the road. Like I'm going to grow into chapter books. I'm going to grow into writing more than 500 words. And when she approached me and said, we have the green light for 8 of these books, and we are wondering if you want to be the writer. I have a personal policy of saying yes to everything, and I lean into the Eleanor Roosevelt quote about do one thing every day that scares you. And I was like, I don't know. Can I do this? And I ended up taking the leap. My husband very wisely said to me, you're going to get paid to learn how to write chapter books, basically, because you have like your final project's always going to end up on the bookshelf. And so I signed on to write the Super Happy Party Bears series. And as things turn out in publishing, because picture books take such a long time, the first 2 Super Happy Party Bears books came out first before any of my picture books. So I actually jumped onto the scene as a chapter book writer, even though that was not my intention. I call myself an accidental chapter book author because I definitely had to learn on the job.
That's amazing though. Like what a like that's fantastic that you said yes and like being scared but doing it anyway. That's like always a good sentiment too. Yeah.
Yeah, I always tell people that I was signing my contract with Macmillan with my right hand while I was Googling how do you write a chapter book series with my left hand because I really seriously did not know. And back then there were very few resources on how, I mean, I've been a lifelong student, so I'm the type of person that if I want to learn how to do something, I just jump into a class. And there was nothing back then, which is why Ari and the Writing Barn both approached me about creating chapter book classes because there was really nothing that was being said in that education area of children's writing as far as chapter books were concerned.
Interesting. So then I'd love to get into for you specifically your creative process. So I imagine it like varies project to project, but do you start with character? Do you start with premise? Like what does that look like to you when you're basically fleshing out the world and the concept for a series or a book?
So often, and this is not anything that I highly recommend to people, but I've heard many authors agree with me that this is their process as well. So often, my books start with a title. And I think one of the reasons why is because I love punny wordplay titles, such as Love, comma, Triangle, which is a story about a circle and a square who are best friends until a triangle shows up, and then they both decide they'd rather be best friends with the triangle. And about 3/4 of the way through the book, the triangle, to try to bring the two characters together, writes a letter to both of them, inviting them over to his house and signs it Love Triangle. And that's how I justified using such a euphemism, a layered title for that book. But that definitely came from the title. And so often I have titles for a long while before I finally have a actual story. So what usually happens is a title will tap on my shoulder and I'll have this idea. And then my critique partners know very much that Marcie once in a while will bring a title to them and say, what's the story about? Like what is this? What does this invoke in you? What do you think about when you hear this title? And then I very much try to write the story to fit that title. Penguinaut was not that case, which it very much seems like it would be because it has this wordplay title. But that came much later. And I think that kind of, because that was the first book that I was really leaning into the process of becoming a published author with, I think it kind of cursed me for the rest of my life to find these titles. I even have a early comics chapter book series that's out on submission right now, and it started with a title that I think I heard maybe 5 years ago, and I was like, that would be a great title. And then it just took me a really long time to find what is the story. Once I have the title, the next step is usually the character, like who is going to be the character here. And then fleshing out the plot from there. Who is this character? What makes them tick? And how are they going to, go on this adventure?
Really cool. And it's so true, like just a seed of an idea, you don't know what it's going to grow into. So I love that. That's really fascinating too, just from the title and then what it can become. That's really
And I've
cool.
I've heard a lot of funny wordplay driven authors say the exact same thing, that they get a title and they're like, that would be a great title for a picture book, but give me a few years and I'll figure out what it's about.
There you go. So yeah, even if it takes some time, it'll like
Yeah.
come to you. That's cool. So you mentioned then critique partners, and obviously that's such like a valuable thing of working with colleagues and getting feedback and giving each other feedback. So I'd love to hear your process with that.
Yeah, I know I hear so many people in a way, sometimes as a complaint, sometimes with a dreamy look in their eye, talk about the fact that writing is so solitary, and that, it's a very lonely craft. I think because my first art form of choice was theater, and I had a whole theater career in New York, prior to being an author. Um, I think that I very much seek out community no matter what kind of art I'm doing. And so even before, I mean, right away when I decided that I wanted to try to become an author, the first thing I did in New York was I took out a Craigslist ad. This is the dumbest thing. I mean, what else? How else did you find people in New York like back in the day? I mean, we're talking about, 12, 13 years ago. But I took out a Craigslist ad looking for other authors because I was kind of like one of those people who never knew a live author. I thought they were all dead, kind of a thing. And so I was like, I need to find these real people. Nobody ever answered that Craigslist ad, which was probably a good thing. I don't really want to know what I would have found because I've looked at apartments on Craigslist, and that's never a good thing. So I ended up through SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, connecting with some groups of people that were also pursuing writing picture books. And I was with a few in-person critique groups in New York for a handful of years. And then when I moved to San Diego, my critique partners very much, my critique groups that I ended up leaning into were all people who lived all over the country. And so it was Zoom. It was all about Zoom, and also just swapping manuscripts through Facebook or, Google Docs. So, but it has always been really important to me to get feedback from other people. I I think coming from theater, I don't believe that I have all the good ideas. Like I'm the only one with the good ideas. And so I like to bounce things off of other people. I like to hear their feedback. I've gotten some really great ideas from critique partners. Um, and then in August of 2021, I started a full-time it's a remote job with Epic, which is an online digital reading app. And I'm a senior writer there. And we have writers' rooms, and it has been one of the most exciting things that I've ever been a part of, where we all get online on Zoom in our little boxes, Brady Bunch boxes, and we talk through what we want a current season to be about. We then go off on our own and we create pitches that we bring in. Everybody comes up with like two or three pitches for different episodes, and then we bounce those off of each other. And the next step is to come back with an outline. And it goes through, drafts. We do table reads, which makes my theater heart just laugh hysterically to think that I can do table reads, although sometimes it bothers me that people can't act very well when they deliver the lines. But, I won't hold it against them. But yeah, so collaboration is so important. And through my work with Epic, I have I have collaborated with many people, not just in the writing room, but Reina Bombardator, who is another senior writer at Epic. Her and I have written a lot of episodes together. We've written a middle grade horror novel through Epic together, and I just love it. I just love that give and take. I never did a one woman show in theater, and I think that that very much shows in the way that I approach my writing. Also, I just love being with other people and hearing their ideas and making each other laugh. So yeah.
That's really wonderful. And that is exactly how TV shows are run too. That's like the highly collaborative medium. So there
Yeah.
you go, like the writer's room pitching and yeah.
Yeah, and I always said that I thought I missed my calling because I thought that I should probably be in children's media. I should be doing television instead, that I should have, gone out to LA and tried to write on a cartoon series. So Epic has very much filled that void for me. Um, and in knowing what that feels like. And now that I write in so many different formats, I should also say that like I have a picture book critique group. I have a funny women critique group where we bring funny manuscripts to each other. That's where I bring a lot of those. I have a title. What would you do with this?
Huh.
I have a comics group that I get together with once a month and we share manuscripts because each one of these formats very much do require a bit different skill and knowledge of the format. And so I don't expect everybody to be able to critique all the things. So I have lots of pockets of people that I get together with and share different pieces of work.
Oh, very interesting because obviously that makes sense too with each industry and market. It varies depending
Yeah.
on comics or picture books, whatever it may be. Very cool. Wow.
Although I will say one of my in-person critique groups in Brooklyn, um, they it was a group that had come out of Gotham Writers Workshop, which is where I had taken my very first writing classes. And there were young adult writers in there, there were middle grade writers in there were screenwriters in there, picture book writers, and I was working with them on Love Triangle. And a big spot that I was completely stuck on that nobody could figure out. One of the screenwriters came up with the idea and the solution. And so it doesn't necessarily, it's always creators are creators, storytellers are storytellers. And so I just definitely value the fact that I was in that room with her, that she was able to get me unstuck. But that's not always the case. It is a learning curve to learn how to write for different formats.
Very true. But then on that same coin, like also it's similar, I don't want to say, well, a little bit in a sense, like again, going back to TV series and book series, how you were talking about in the chapter book class about like developing your characters in terms of, okay, description, what do they want? What are their relationships from one another? And that's a lot of stuff that like, it's basically pre-writing. It's part of, okay, like let me flesh out this world before I actually sit down and write. That's what helps prevent writer's block, of course, like getting that all out there.
I have never been able to be a pantser who writes by the seat of my pants. I am an outliner, I am a plotter, and I have students sometimes who take my chapter book class that I very much have to say to them, I'm going to ask you to do a lot of pre-writing. But if you're going to have a world that is going to be in several books with characters with character arcs and emotional arcs and everything that go through several different books or several different episodes. There very much is a need to do that pre-writing and really know who these characters and who this world is before you ever even start to write. And then yes, I mean I used to think that writer's block was a thing. I think it's just that sometimes you're not prepared to write whatever you're getting ready to write. And so, I usually do not start writing until I have a very clear sense of where I'm going. And with a picture book, that means I know my beginning, I somewhat have an idea of what's going to happen in the middle, and then I have an end point. I know exactly where I'm going. With a chapter book, it usually means that I've broken down the plot points based on chapters. Like this is what's going to happen in chapter one. This is what's going to happen in chapter two. With comics, it's a page by page breakdown. And then I can just sit down and kind of just I think that sometimes people that don't want to do outlines think that it's then going to be incredibly rigid, but I'm not rigid with myself when I'm writing it. I mean, sometimes things change while I'm writing, but it also keeps me away from having to focus on what's going to happen next and instead just entertain myself and just make myself laugh and be like, oh, well, I've got this room within this plot point that I have to hit on this page. And now I can do that in any way that I want and I can just have fun with it. And then it feels like I always know where I'm going. And yeah, it kind of takes away that whole idea of writer's block and just staring at the blank screen.
You definitely, you hit the nail on the head when you said, like, basically with writer's block, like if you're not prepared, then of course you're not going to know what comes next or whatever. But then it's so true too what you just said of, well, I want to make myself laugh. What do I find funny? What do I find interesting? So absolutely, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah, I once had somebody ask me with the Super Happy Party Bears, they asked me how I was able to write so funny and how I was able to write for that sweet spot of like an 8 or 9 year old. And I really didn't have a good answer, except for I think maybe I'm an 8 or a 9 year old. I mean, like, because people ask me all the time, like, well, did you have to watch your vocab that you use? Like you did, and I'm like, I don't think I have a bigger vocabulary than an 8 or 9 year old. It's like, and I find things that 8 or 9 year olds find funny. So, it was just kind of like, well, that's just kind of my sensibility. Like, it's not like I'm this middle-aged woman who has to like try to come in contact with my inner child or something. It's the inner child is very much there all the time.
That's a wonderful thing though, because yeah, just tapping into your kid-like spirit and that imagination, that's beautiful. And so when you do sit down to write, do you have like a creative space dedicated for yourself, like maybe an office, or like when you actually finally do sit down and want to get writing done?
Yes. This where I'm sitting right now is my office, but I only do like meetings and work here.
Mm.
If I want to creatively write, I sit on my couch. I have an end of my couch that I sit on, usually with a cup of coffee next to me. I have had for several years, I have a routine of getting up Monday through Friday at 5 a.m. At 5:25, a friend of mine who lives in the LA area texts me good morning, and we tell each other what we're going to be working on that morning. It's just like an accountability partner.
Mm.
And then we get writing and usually check back in with each other like around 7 o'clock, 7:30. And that time is my personal writing time. I refuse to write anything that is for epic during that time. It's my little sacred time to work on the Marcie Colleen projects that I want to get out into the world. And so I love getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning because I like the comfort of the quiet in the dark as I just sit in my living room with twinkle lights on and a cup of coffee and get to work. And, sometimes it's not all writing and putting words down in a document. I mean, lately I've been working on a picture book that I have a punny title for, and I'm searching for the character, and I have a stack of old 1950s Dennis the Menace comics that I got out of the library. And I'm just sitting there with my coffee in the morning, reading through comics and using it as a brainstorm and writing down things that my character can do. So, it's not always writing. Writing doesn't always look like writing. I mean, sometimes writing is, at 7:30 is the time that I go out for my run then. And sometimes the writing happens in my head while I'm running. Sometimes it's once I've gotten my body moving and then I get home and I get in the shower. Sometimes I didn't
Mm.
write it all from 5:30 to 7:30, and then all of a sudden I go for a run, I get in the shower, and all of a sudden all the ideas start coming at me and I'm like, "Come on, man. I got like a meeting at 9 o'clock. Like why are you talking to me now, Muse?" So writing doesn't always look like writing, but usually I'll be sitting on my couch with a cup of coffee.
I relate so much to all of this. It's just so true. You don't know when inspiration all of a sudden it hits you when you least expect it, most often than not. That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, I remember Elizabeth Gilbert in I don't know if it was in her book Big Magic or it was in her podcast Magic Lessons, which was based on Big Magic, that she talked about like spending a long time like sitting at the computer looking for the words, not being able to find the words, and then all of a sudden like getting in the car and then all of a sudden all the ideas start coming at her and she's like, I gave you time. Why are you now speaking to me? Like, but I think sometimes it's you have to kind of let go of that overthinking, analytic logic that's in your mind that's like, because I edit everything in my head too. And so sometimes you have to just kind of get away from that. And then all of a sudden things start to loosen up.
That's so true. It's basically like having the joy in the entire process of, okay, this is my time where I'm just going to go crazy and just write whatever comes to me. And then this is a time where I'm going to sit down and edit whatever part it may be, or this is a time where I'm going to brainstorm. And it's all part of it, connecting to whatever project it is. So, yeah, that's so true. And so I'd love to hear then. So like say when you have something written, what for you then is the next step in terms of okay, working with an editor, getting notes, like kind of like the next phase with that?
Usually once I get something written, first of all, I will say one of my tools in my tool belt is that as I'm writing, especially with picture books, I use the read to me function in Word a lot, even though it is a robot voice that speaks to me. I like to hear my work read aloud, or I will read it aloud as I'm writing. And a lot of times, especially, I even do this with longer prose like chapter books. I will just put it on and I will close my eyes and I'll listen to the chapter. And then a lot of times I'll find missing words, I'll find spots that, oh, I need to flesh that out. But once I get to the point where I feel like I have something solid and it's as far as I can take it, I will take it to critique groups and get feedback. And sometimes, based on how much feedback they give me, it can be a couple of rounds of getting feedback. And then the next step would be sending it to my agent. She is usually editorial to a point. So I will get usually some notes and do another revision for her, and then it's time to send it out to editors and see if anybody's interested. The process takes a while, but as you had said, it's about finding joy in every single bit of the process. So I love that. I love the idea part of the process where you're just gathering and you're writing things down and you're getting inspired. And then I love the part of the actual act of writing. I love sharing my writing with other people and getting feedback. Revision is so much easier for me because I don't have the words are already on the page. I just have to change them now. It's just, the basic, like once I write something, then people can help me make it better. And so I love revision. So every bit of the process is something that I have learned to find joy in.
Absolutely. I know that's so important too, because especially when, like you just said, things take a long time. That's something for me, I just will say, because I've been on this journey now and like I sometimes get, to be frank, like discouraged in terms of, okay, it's like, well, I want to write something that I love. And then it's a matter of, okay, then it's like you got to go out and sell it and query agents. That's like, so the whole other aspect, obviously, is like the business side of it. But I'm trying to remind myself, okay, it's like one thing at a time. First, like you're in the creative part, and that's like where the magic happens. So yeah, it's just like it takes time. I guess it's like a matter of patience too, with all that to say, you
Oh,
know.
yeah. I once heard somebody say something about if you ever knew how long it was going to take, you probably never would start and to begin with. So sometimes it's good that
Mm,
we always have that, like, this could be it. This could be the moment. Like, I was just recently talking to somebody and I said that I think my word for 2024 is possibility because I have so many things out on submission and so many things that I'm working on right now that really every single Monday through Friday is a possibility that I'm going to hear from somebody that they want one of these manuscripts. And, but it's a long slog. And it is easy to get discouraged. And I think one of the reasons, and maybe you're feeling the same way, one of the reasons why I knew I wanted to go the traditional route and have an agent is because I hate all that business stuff. I want somebody else to take care of that.
mm.
So knowing that once you get representation, you can just go back to doing what you love, which is creating. And they can take care of the business aspect of it. But then, of course, once you sell a book to a publishing house, and then there's the whole like promotion that they want you to do, and more and more and more of that is falling on the shoulders of the author. I'm probably not the best person to even bring that up because I don't do a lot of promotion. For me, my promotion is writing the next good thing. Like I can't be spending all this money going to different places that don't pay just to promote my book. But yeah, it's having that agent is like a kind of a carrot that you're like, once I get that agent, they can take care of researching editors and telling me who would be interested in this and writing up submission letters and all that stuff. So just know that once that part of your career starts, you won't have to do as much of the business anymore.
That is like encouraging to hear too. And I love what you just said too, like 2024 possibility. That's always like, that's a great perspective to have. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I was single and living in New York City and I would get like invited to a barbecue or something. And I was
Hmm.
like, you never know who you're going to meet. Like maybe this is the party. Maybe this is what's going to happen. And so just having that feeling that any moment could be the moment, it's not lost on me living on the West Coast that like I wake up and the East Coast is already working. So perhaps I'll have an email in my inbox already. But then at the same time, at 2 p.m., it's like, oh, they're done for the day. I'm not going to get anything now because it's 5 p.m. on the East Coast. And so guess that day's going by without a book deal. But yeah, just that constant knowing that your manuscripts are out there making the rounds, doing what they need to do while I can focus on writing is just a really fun thing. And then once somebody acquires your manuscript, knowing that your book is going through the process of the publishing house without you needing to do anything, I think is just really exciting. I have a book in progress right now at Random House, and I hear from them occasionally, but the artist is busy working, and I just know that there are meetings being talking about my book, and there's an artist working on my book, and I can just kind of sit back and wait until I see the magic of the first sketches, kind of a thing.
Well, that's always exciting too, like the
Yeah.
next step of it coming to life more. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear if you could give perhaps like just an overview in terms of querying agents, because obviously that's a whole big part of the business too, and just kind of in a broad sense, so to speak, of like do's and don'ts with that.
Yeah, I would say definitely start a list of agents that you've heard speak or that you've read about that you feel like might have the same sensibility as you, that might be somebody that you're willing to work with, someone that you feel comfortable with. I think that's important because I've heard people talk before about like being worried that they're going to bother their agent and not wanting to send an email to their agent because their agent is so busy and such a powerhouse, and it's just no, you need to feel like your agent is a partner for you. So finding that person who seems to get you. Um there are going to be a lot of people who are not going to offer representation, but when you find somebody who really gets you as an author and seems to think that everything that you write that you've got the ability to write it, that they like what you write, um there's nothing that is better than that. So, it's kind of you hear all the time is all you need is one yes. You're going to hear a lot of no's, but all you need is that one yes. And it's the same thing with finding an editor. It's, the rejections come, they're painful. I know a lot of people right now, seeing as it's the end of 2023, I know a lot of people who can very much feel that editors are going inbox empty. So sometimes people are getting like 3 or 4 rejections a day because they're like, oh, people are really weeding out to making sure that they have everything done before the end of the year. And those rejections never get easier. But when you find someone who's a true cheerleader for you and a true cheerleader for your work, there's nothing like it. I would also say um, something that's common in the industry is to talk about agents and artist relationships like a marriage. And I don't really buy into that so much because I think sometimes that makes it feel like you're in this for life. And
Mhm.
if there's problems, like you're in this for life. Now, I'm a divorced woman, so obviously I don't completely buy into that even with marriage. However, I am on my second agent. And, when I signed with my first agent, it was back in 2012, I think. And, she sold my first books for me. She was very much a great agent for me as a new author, someone who was very green. But as your agent grows, as you grow, sometimes you grow apart. And there's nothing wrong with then realizing who is going to be best for the next stage of my career. And so in early 2021, I ended up leaving that agent, and now I am with a different agent who is much better suited for where I want my career to go right now. And that's not to say that I might change directions, that I might need a different agent for something else that I might be working on in the future. But just don't feel like, because I remember before I signed my first agent contract feeling like all of a sudden cold feet, like what if I've made a mistake and I don't know her very well and maybe this isn't going to be the right fit. And one of my friends gave me this really great advice where she said, sometimes the only way to know is to start working together and to find out if it works. And it did work for a while and then it didn't work. So don't feel like you're legally binding yourself to this person for life. Your career is going to grow, your career is going to change. When I first signed, I thought I was only going to be a picture book author.
Hmm.
I didn't know that I was going to be somebody who loved doing IP work for other publishers and doing work for hire, which I absolutely love doing. So as I grew as a writer, I needed to find somebody else. So don't feel like you're putting a ring on it because you're not.
That's really good advice. I appreciate your transparency with all of that too. And even what you just said, that like with the rejections too, they still come, and it's just kind of you got to keep moving forward on to the next one. Yeah.
Yeah, you just kind of feel like, sometimes you get to that next level of your career. I remember when I signed with my first agent and I like foolishly ended up telling my mom that like, well, now I have an agent, so I'll probably have a book deal within a couple of weeks. I don't know what I was thinking. I mean,
Hmm.
how green and how foolish, but it kept me going. Like I was like, I'm getting that much closer. But it doesn't even matter if you've sold a zillion books or if you're a book bestseller, like you still have to find that right home for your manuscript and not every home is going to work and it's there's always rejection. There's always rejection and yeah, it's just part of the process.
So now then, when you decided you wanted like a new agent years into your career at that point, is it like back to the drawing board, so to speak, in terms of like researching other agents, or do you look for opportunities if someone's going to approach you? Like, how does that work?
I had been in the industry long enough that I kind of knew the agency that I wanted to be at and
Hmm.
that I would have probably been happy to sign with any of the agents at Andrea Brown. And so I had a conversation with an agent that I knew there that I had known for years, and she just basically said, "Send me what you have." Now, one thing that I've had friends who have been in this position of in between agents, you do have to have new work, which
Hmm.
is like you can't just say, well, I published this book, that book, and this book because that new agent doesn't care. They want to have stuff that they can make money on, that they can actually go out and sell. And so it was at first I was like, I don't have anything. And then I went through my files and I was just like, oh, yeah, I actually have a lot of stuff here that I can send that either had gone out on submission with my prior agent and had never sold. And so I contacted this agent that I knew. And she said, I will share this widely within the agency. And then she came back to me and said that Paige Turlip was very interested. She was building her list. And I was like, oh, okay. So we took a Zoom call and got to know each other, and I ended up signing with her. So I was probably unagented for about 4 months or so. But I was also during that time, my dad passed away. I kind of was like, nothing matters, who cares? So I threw out, like, I just sent that query out to my friend at Andrea Brown just because it was like, who cares? Like, there's so many more important things in this world. So I had this very much like devil may care attitude. And so I sent it out there and that did end up leading to getting my second agent. But yeah, I think that when when you've been around for a while, you get to know people. And I know several people who have left agents that kind of use those contacts as a way of finding their second agent.
That's really good, and that makes sense because it's like you have to ultimately advocate for yourself. So yeah, that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, but there was a part of me at one point that thought that like, yeah, but I've sold this book and I've sold that book and like, but yeah, they're gonna want new work because if you're not producing, and I wasn't as prolific back in early 2021 as I am now, where I definitely have lots new stuff that I could share with an agent. But it is like, oh, I guess I have to show new work because they're gonna want to make some money.
Of course, yeah, exactly. That's the whole thing. Like, still,
Aren't we
yeah, like fair
all?
enough. Yeah, right. Like fair enough. It's still a business at the end of the day. Yeah.
Capitalism still
Gotta say.
happens.
There you go. That's so true. So now, in terms of like all the stuff you've worked on, I understand like I'm gonna ask this question because it's kind of like it's all a part of you in a sense. But do you have a favorite project you've worked on?
Ooh, yeah, that is a tough one. I would say right now, um, I am in a deep, loving relationship with comics. I love writing comics. It took me it took me moving to San Diego and talking to a friend and being in an area that is so Comic-Con obsessed
Mhm.
that it just became like, oh, comics. And I never knew that I would be able to write comics because I don't draw. And so I always was under the impression that I would have had to have been an artist in order to make comics. And I have learned that that is not the case. So you can very much write a script. Um, but I think that I have finally found the format that really melds my theater sensibilities with my writing sensibilities and being able to tell a story both visually and with words sequentially has just been a deep love of mine. So I've been writing comics now for a few years. It's my day job that I write comics, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. But each one of my books is kind of led into the other, and they're very different. I mean, I think that sometimes it's really nice to be able to have like one thing that you do and you do really well and you're known as like the funny punny picture book lady or something. And I kind of thought that that's what was going to happen at the beginning of my career, but I have done so many different things that I never know where that inspiration and that curiosity is going to take me. I mean, I've written a nonfiction lyrical picture book about September 11th. I've written so many different books that I don't know if you could actually say, oh yeah, that looks like a Marcie Colleen book because I just have so many varied interests. And so they're all so unique in so many ways that it's hard to pick one.
Yeah, of course. That's really cool, the diversity and just like all the different things and different worlds, all this cool stuff. I did want to touch on that book because I never knew about that and just like the symbolism of that with the beauty of that tree that still is there to this day. And like the symbolism then of that hope, despite all the tragedy of the September 11th attacks. Wow, that's so profound in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that that book was completely nonfiction. I mean, I chose the structure with which to tell the story. I chose to tell it through colors and seasons and lyrically. But that story, when I first read about the survivor tree, I very much felt like, wow, this is like the universe giving me a story that already has a really solid beginning, middle, and end. Like
Mm.
even writing it, it's like I can't believe it's all true. Like I can't believe that the tree, when it was being rehabilitated, they really couldn't find any signs of life once it moved up to the Bronx until a dove nested in it. And all of a sudden they started like seeing buds and stuff. And it's like that stuff seems so totally made up, but it very much was a true story that, it tugged at my heart as a New Yorker, as somebody who still felt so much trauma from 9/11 that I had to write it. But it was one of those moments where I was like, but I don't write these kind of things. That's not what I write. I don't write poetry. I don't write lyricism. Um, but I do now. Like I learned how to do it. And I'm very proud of that book. I think to go back to your previous question, I think that book is so totally different than probably anything else that I maybe will ever write. That I'm very, very proud that it found its home at Little Brown and that Aaron Becker, who's a Caldecott honor winning illustrator, did an amazing job with that and that it's out there in the world.
That's really beautiful. And again, going back to it's like you never knew you could write that until you did, and then it's out there. That's beautiful. Yeah. And so I know also you do school visits. I'd love to hear about those experiences and what it's like talking with kids and like establishing like, these are the future, like and inspiring kids to create and write and explore their,
Oh,
imaginations.
I don't do a ton of school visits, but every time I do, there's just something so special that comes out of it. I usually start my school visits, like I talk about, the focus that I usually talk about with school visits is inspiration and where ideas come from and where I've gotten ideas for each one of my books. And in my path from being a kid who wrote my own books in my room quietly and illustrated them all poorly with crayon, and I have a bunch of those books still, and to share those like screenshots of those with kids at the beginning. I have this one book that I share with them that I wrote when I was in like second grade. But I save until the very end the fact that I also included an about the author section in that book. And it says, Marcie Goldstein lives in Liverpool, New York, and someday she hopes to be a successful author. And when I found that I had written that in second grade, and then I had like 15,000 careers from the moment that I wrote that to the moment that I actually became a published author, it blew my mind. And I remember sharing that final slide with kids at one school. We were in a giant gym or auditorium, and the kids are all sitting on the floor. And I read that author's note. And this one kid who, in my mind, will always be Buddy the Elf from the movie Elf, like jumped onto his knees and yelled, "You did it! You really did it!" And then the whole auditorium started applauding. And I was like, all
Oh,
right, I'm going to sit here and cry now because it was so moving. I mean, kids are creative every single day. My husband is a professional Lego artist. That's what he does for a living. He builds his own artwork using Lego bricks. And I've said to kids before, "Oh, my husband is a Lego artist," and they'll be like, "So am I." I love that kids just they
amazing.
immediately feel like they're on the same level as you. So, especially when I talk to them about some of the series that I've written, like Super Happy Party Bears or Kitten Ninja or Time Buddies that I write for Epic, they immediately go into this like, I have a story idea for you. Like you should have an episode where the Super Happy Party Bears, blah, 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 and they will go on and on. And it's like all of a sudden you feel like you're with a bunch of colleagues because they don't have that internal editor yet, that critic inside their head telling them, "Oh, well, you could never do that," because they very much do. So it's really cool being at school visits. And I love presenting. I love teaching. I love presenting. And so whenever I get an opportunity to do that, I definitely jump on it.
That's so cool. What like I got swept up in that story that you just shared. Wow, that's beautiful. Like with the
Seriously,
kids.
that
That's
kid is
wonderful.
Buddy the Elf to me. I mean, it's like nobody else like made that kind of a reaction, but he just jumped onto his knees and wow, I will never, ever, ever forget him. And then also I remember being at one school visit where I did say that my husband was a Lego artist, and I think that's where this one kid said, "So am I." And then this girl quietly came up to me after I had presented and she said, "Just so you know, I think books are much cooler than Lego."
I
It's
love
like,
that. Oh my
thanks,
goodness.
girl. You're my
Yeah.
people. It's like I'm
Yes.
gonna tell my husband I'm cooler.
See, and then so it's a matter of like fostering that confidence with these kids and yeah, encouraging. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Oh
They give
wow.
you fan art, I mean, it's just like there's just something they're just so right there with you to jump creatively, which is not something that you get when you talk to adults, they start to think, "Oh, I could never do that." But kids, they're right there with you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so wonderful too. I did want to actually also ask you about because I understand you've published some books under a pen name. So I was just curious to
Yeah.
know, like in terms of like when you create a pen name, I know like it's your both your parents' names. That's so sweet. But
Yes.
so is that like in terms of just like a business decision or like what works like in terms of like the industry, the
Yeah, I'm so
benefit of
glad that
that?
you asked about that because a lot of
Mm,
people do wonder. And I do claim on my website that, hey, I have these books written under a pen name. That is strictly for a business thing because those books are work for hire books that a publisher came to me and said, "We want a board book about, how to be a big brother, and we want it to rhyme." And the Marcie Colleen brand is not rhyming. The Marcie Colleen brand is usually not those kind of books about like, I have a couple like it's grand to be a grandparent, and I love you the mostest, and my mini me, and titles that are not things that I normally write about, my sensibility. But I can. It's just, they're work for hire. And because they're work for hire, there's no royalty attached. I get a flat fee. I write the manuscript. It gets submitted. Sometimes there's a round or two of revision, and then it very much goes to the publishing house, and I don't lay eyes on that manuscript again until they send me a author copy of the book. And so there's a thing in traditional publishing. I know sometimes people who lean towards self-publishing get really, really worried that if they try to go traditionally, that somebody is going to change their story or have more power over their story than they do. It's a control thing. They don't want to give their story over to a publishing house to possibly change. And the truth is that when you sign with a publishing house, you retain copyright of your text. They can't even add a comma without your permission. Like, everything has to be approved by you. There is not a single word in any of my traditionally published books that have my name on it that I did not have a say in what is actually on the page. But with work for hire, it's completely different. They can down the road decide that they want to add a line in. They can change a word. They can do anything. And because of that, I don't have as much creative control. In fact, I really don't have any creative control. And so, I personally don't want to put my name on things that, I don't have complete personal creative control over the text. Sometimes they'll change a word that the rhyme scheme doesn't work as well as it did before. So, I love those projects. I love working on them. I love having the experience of writing things that I wouldn't normally write. It's kind of like being like given a homework assignment. Like, here's your project, write a picture book about, or write a board book about grandparents, and go, and so then you just go and you write it. And they've definitely expanded me as a writer. But because I have absolutely no connection to those books post manuscript, I have decided to keep them within a pen name, because publishers will, when they are looking at possibly giving you a book deal, they will search your name on BookScan and other places to see your sales track. And I have nothing I have no idea about those sales track for those books. Those books go all over the place. Some of them are exclusively sold in Target. And yeah, I just have no say in any of that. So it was better to keep it separate and say, okay, these books are Marcie Colleen books, and these books over here are Marilyn James books, which is funny because at one point I felt like Marilyn James was getting more book deals than I was. And I was like, this lady all of a sudden has more work than I do. Everybody wants a book from Marilyn James, but nobody wants a Marcie Colleen book. So, but yeah, they're great fun to write.
This alter ego, it's too funny. I appreciate you explaining all that. I didn't know all of that. That's very interesting. So then, are there any upcoming projects that you were able to share? Like, any upcoming current projects?
Yes. So I have two books coming out in 2024 through Epic and published by Andrews McMeel. This will be my very first time being published as a comics writer. So I have Kitten Ninja, which is a prequel to our very popular Cat Ninja series at Epic. Kitten Ninja is a series that I am the lead writer on. And we have our first volume of Kitten Ninja, the first three comics, coming out in February. I think it's February 27th. That's coming out to bookshelves everywhere. And there are three comics in there, and I have written two out of the three. And then in June, I believe, Time Buddies, which is also a Cat Ninja spinoff that I am lead writer on, will be coming out. There are five comic episodes in that volume, and I wrote four out of the five. So I'm really excited to, for the first time, be able to really enter the world of comics writing. I'm talking to Andrews McMeel about getting me at ALA and getting me at Comic Cons to sign and maybe be on panels regarding that. And then my next traditionally published book is called Happy Friendsgiving, and that is with Random House, and that unfortunately is not coming out until the fall of 2025. because these things take a
Mm.
long time. But that is a lyrical, experiential picture book about what Friendsgiving is all about, bringing lots of different diverse cultures together and sharing a meal, and how people celebrate the holiday of Thanksgiving with their chosen families as opposed to their real families. So, yeah, so I'm really excited about that book coming out, but I'm most excited and in the nearest future, just excited to step into that comics writer realm.
Oh, wonderful. It's
Because
so
so far
cool.
everything's been digitally on the Epic app. So,
Oh,
this will be the first time that it's like my name is on the cover of a book that is comics. So,
nice. That's exciting. Yeah, I know. Nothing like just, holding like traditional, like just holding a book. Like I
yeah.
still prefer that over
I
anything.
know. And in
Yeah.
Epic is a subscription. So it's like lots of my friends are like, we
Oh,
want to see your comics, but it's a subscription. And so a
mm.
lot of people, unless their kid is at a school that uses Epic and they can use their kid's account when they get, home, a lot of people don't see them. So yeah, it's gonna be exciting to actually have like physical books.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, that's really cool. And so this has been such an absolute pleasure chatting you. I can't thank you enough. So I generally love ending my interviews by asking for advice. That can be like life advice, career advice, any advice you care to share.
Let's see. Any advice that I care to share? I think, and I say this knowing that I was late to the game in this, but finding a way to find joy in the entire process is so important. I did not come to find joy in writing and use it almost like an escape until 2020 when we all found ourselves in lockdown with really scary news and stuff outside our doors. And I ended up finding that I was happiest if I could just sit with my laptop and just kind of go into my own world and entertain myself. And so being able to find that joy, and I think sometimes that joy doesn't come until you really find consistency with your writing. I'm not one who says you got to write every single day because I don't usually write on Saturdays and Sundays. It's my job, so I don't really write on Saturdays and Sundays, but I do write Monday through Friday at 5:30 every single day. Morning's not going to work for everybody. Some people are night owls. I've never been a night owl. Some people can write in the middle of the day. But finding consistency, because just like with anything, I'm someone who is a runner that runs every single day, and I have run every single day for the past several years. And there are some days that aren't good. There are some days that are really hard to run, even though I only run a little over a mile every single day. There are some days that are really hard. But the fact that I do that every single day just makes it overall that much easier. So the more consistency, just find even a half an hour a day to sit down and write. The more proficient you are at something, the more fun it is, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like it's no fun. Like I just joined a band and I'm like struggling through pretending that I'm a guitarist and it's not fun. Like I can't wait until the point where I am a little bit more proficient and I can actually have more fun with it than to be in my head thinking, "Oh my goodness, you are so awful." So, you just have to use that consistency and I think the joy will come with it. And then, it's a great thing to be a creative. It's all I need is a piece of paper and a pen and I can entertain myself. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well said. I feel so inspired from this conversation. Thank you so much, Marcia. This was wonderful. I can't thank you enough. So, please feel free to share your social media as well.
Sure. I am on Instagram, at Marcie Colleen, MarcieColleen. I am used to be on what is it called now? X, whatever.
Right.
I only get junk on there now, so I don't think that even really counts anymore. But I was on there at Marcie Colleen 1. And then my website is thisismarciecolleen.com. So you can check out any of the classes that I'm teaching, any of the resources that I provide for authors, because I do a lot of one-on-one critiques and mentorships in any of my upcoming work.
And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. Be sure to check out storytellingsaga.com. And as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.